Hello, I'm Eric Devin, and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show on today, March 9th, 2017. Joining me as sift through the ashes of midweek football are, as always, Adam White and Nathan Staples. But first, a brief update on the results of said matches. Paris Saint-Germain traveled to Barcelona in the Champions League round of 16, nursing a 4-0 lead from the first leg. The result, a controversial 6-1 win for the host, did see Barcelona progress on aggregate. There's better news for French football in the match that just finished a few minutes ago. Lyon were also in midweek action at the Parc OL, turned in a gutty performance to come back from 2-1 deficit to top Roma 4-2. So without further ado, gents, we will get started with the match from last night. That would be PSG's loss to Barcelona. Nathan, we'll start with you. We had some interesting team choices from Unai Emery. One in particular I'd like to start with is Thiago Silva. I published a piece in The Guardian earlier today about this, and I wanted to know, first of all, what are your gents' thoughts on this? I mean, we had Presnel Kimpembe and Marquinhos keep a clean sheet against Barcelona 3 weeks ago. Silva has been out of physical form, out of mental form this season. Was it the right call to start him?
With, again, hindsight being 2020, no, because he did struggle in this one. And so, but at the same time, a lot of the blame is being pinned on Thiago Silva, who did struggle. But there wasn't a single player out there that didn't at least put in a relatively poor performance, other than maybe Cavani. But Silva this season's been a little bit different. It seems like the games are starting to finally take a physical and possibly a mental toll on him. He doesn't seem as sharp as he did positionally. His recovery speed is not quite as where it was before. So that starts to worry you, especially when how well Presnel Kimpembe was in that initial game with Marquinhos as well. But I think Marquinhos gets off a little bit lightly at the same time, because he was definitely at fault for the first two goals that really opened the door for Barcelona early on. A poor defensive header kept the ball in the area for Suarez to score, and he was very weak.
Nathan?
Have I dropped?
No, you're there. Go ahead. Or not. Nathan, why don't you try rejoining? Adam, what are your thoughts on the Thiago Silva-Kimpembe debate?
I think it's an interesting one. I think it's very difficult to say that Thiago Silva should have been dropped for this game. I know that Kimpembe was brilliant in the first leg. He was absolutely fantastic, and so was Marquinhos. They were great against Barcelona in that first game. But Thiago Silva, he came top of our Get French Football News 100 players in France last year. He's the PSG captain. He's still one of the best centre-backs in the world. You can't not play him. I know that they were brilliant in that first game, but it was the obvious choice. You had to bring him in. Imagine if they hadn't gone through as well. It had to happen. But I agree that his performance was possibly the worst I've seen in a PSG shirt from him. I just felt like there was absolutely no leadership watching that game, watching the amount of just sheer opportunities that Barcelona sort of willed into existence, and him and Marquinhos between them, but Silva is sort of the prime example, sort of failed to combat anything. I felt like it was so weak, such a weak captaincy performance from Silva, and just a weak defensive performance that they just crumbled, and he was the main catalyst for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said, too, for the idea that not only in terms of performance, that dropping Silva could potentially represent a sea change here on the part of PSG's evolution as a club. Initially, we talked about how this team have brought in players, the likes of Silva, Thiago Motta, Marco Verratti, Pastore, trying to build a team financially. But recently this season, we've seen good performances from the likes of players who are academy products, that being Rabiot, Nkunku, Kimpembe, and really start to impress, really start to look like more of an organically built team. And I think there's also something you said for the message that dropping Silva was sent in terms of this is now a team that can confidently build in a way that's organic, in a way that's sustainable, in a way that makes sense. It's not just, the Manchester City model of, I know Manchester City have had some young players come through as well, Iheanacho being a prime example. But building a team for success in Europe needs to be done in terms of a team that's built holistically, not simply with piles of cash.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that possibly the thing that really sticks out for me in terms of what you're saying there is that sort of that holistic approach. With Barcelona, there are players in that team that you feel winning for Barcelona means something to the group, not just to the individual players, but to the group. There's a their link to the club is community and sort of societally based, if you like. I know that the PSG players, perhaps this may be a little bit harsh on some of them, but I know they very much care about progressing in this competition, and as they care about each other as a group. But I don't know that there's that anchor, that sort of anchor that Barcelona have, that other big teams have, that really roots the team in the local community and in that club's history and that club's tradition. I don't think PSG have that. They're missing that core of players. Rabiot is perhaps the only one that represents that, that's a regular, really. I know that Kimpembe's been good this season, has played a bit, and he would be another one, but I feel like they're lacking that spine. When you look at Barcelona yesterday, you've got Iniesta, you've got Messi, you've got even Sergio Roberto, players like that who've come through the academy, and Piqué as well. They've got that. They're rooted in Barcelona. Barcelona means something to them. I don't know if Paris Saint-Germain means something really, as to like really ingrained in that squad. It doesn't necessarily on a individual and a group basis. I think it's a little bit perhaps like Manchester City, and I think they had the same issue, that it's a little bit shallow in those terms. And PSG emotionally have lacked emotional strength and physical and sort of mental fortitude for such a long time, and it really showed yesterday to the painful extent, to be honest. And they just crumbled, and I feel like they're lacking that core of sort of emotional and mental strength, and it's come from that. But
no, I would absolutely not disagree. The other player that I wanted to ask about, coming to you, Nathan, is Angel Di Maria. If this player is fit enough to play 40-plus minutes, why doesn't he get the start? He totally changed the match upon coming on for me. I know people might be issuing some takedowns on him for failing to square that ball to Cavani, but why doesn't he start?
I don't know is probably the simple answer to that. You think that especially in recent games, they've not started Lucas in favour of Angel Di Maria because of his preferred performances and his improvement in the last couple of weeks since Draxler's come into the team. But you would think that if a player is only available for, I think they were saying about 60 minutes, surely 60 minutes should be from the start. And it seemed unusual that I don't think Lucas is any better of a defensive player, and certainly not. So I don't. And when you start watching the Brazilian's performance, he gave the ball away numerous times in the first half, especially where he seemed to gift Barcelona possession on regular occasions, and it just invited more pressure onto them. And you're right, in the second half, Di Maria pulled that away. He was good on the counter-attack when they got the opportunity to do so. He maybe one or two passes here, maybe should score the goal, maybe should cross for Cavani. There's here's and there's, but he certainly made a difference to a team that needed a goal at that point. And then with the second one, if they could have got it, it would have absolutely completely killed the tie. But it does bring to question of, like you say, his Emery's choices and players again. The midfield seemed to, for at least what they wanted to do, which is sit back and defend, it seemed unusual. They were constantly within their own 30 yards, every single player. And I couldn't understand it. They had no outlet. They had no one available on the break, especially in the first half. So it's puzzling why they didn't have someone like Di Maria, who's not as much of, I don't think Lucas is that much of a better defensive presence than him, if that was the reason why he chose him.
No, the other thing, too, is that the role that Lucas is being asked to do, I mean, he tended to cut infield and provide more support for the midfield centrally rather than tracking back in wide areas, as Di Maria was doing, or offering an outlet on the counter, as you rightly said. So certainly they were asked to do different things. But continuing now to my final question about personnel selection, did Emery get it wrong at the end to bring on Krychowiak? Or should he have kept more balance in the side with Meunier playing as a sort of makeshift right winger? Adam, we'll send that one to you first.
I think it's almost perhaps picking, sort of clutching at straws a little bit to that. It feels like, would that change if he'd made the opposite change? Would it have made too much of a difference? perhaps it was a little bit facetious to change like that, and not keeping Munier on that right wing, which he's played a couple of times before, and he's obviously a little bit more defensively minded, well, much more defensively minded than perhaps any other players to use there, and it keeps a bit more balance. But to be criticised for what in the end is a small decision, I feel is one of the things that perhaps has come off a little bit harshly on Emery. I feel like the game was lost in other areas and in other decisions, perhaps. So yes, perhaps Kukoviak perhaps was surprised making the squad for me. I think he's been very, very disappointing to say the least this season, and I was surprised to see him in there, especially with Nkunku, who in the opposite terms is not a big money signing. He's come through the youth academy and has been brilliant this season. So on merit, Nkunku should be in the squad, and it would seem that perhaps even that was the wrong decision. But for me, it seems like a pretty small one to level at Emery's feet, given the amount of things that did go wrong in the game.
All right, Nathan, are they players that could take credit from this match?
Oh, good question. Maybe Cavani, even though he really should probably score the one chance he gets, but he's unlucky with the one that hits the post, and he scores a fine goal. I think his work rate was decent. To say he was told to track back, and maybe he could have applied more pressure to PK when they push forward with those back three. If he managed to sneak the ball off him, it might have been an interesting counter-attack. But he's the only player really that comes away with anything. I think the goalkeeper was poor and indecisive too regularly. This was the old trap instead of the new trap, which is extra worrying for Paris Saint-Germain. The defence was awful for the entire game. The centre-backs were bad. The full-backs were even worse. Kurzawa might as well not have played the game.
Yeah.
The midfield was... It felt like, especially Rabiot and Matuidi were just chasing shadows all night and just trying to find some kind of position in the field, and they repeatedly lost the ball. Verratti was maybe overplaying too often. He admits that that's a fault in himself, that he always feels like he has to play that way, but that really played into Barcelona's hands. And Lucas and Draxler were just non-existent passengers for the majority of the game, other than I thought Draxler was a little bit better in the second half when he did have a little bit more space. But it was just such an abject, poor performance. And I think this has been mentioned enough that the fact that I don't think Barcelona ever really shifted into high gear to really push out this result. The fact that was such a emphasis that it didn't even... I can't believe they scored 6 goals last night. They were nowhere near good enough to score 3, really. I don't think Barcelona ever really looked like a great threat. You think that 2 of the goals are penalties, 2 of the goals are dreadful defensive mistakes. One's an absolutely sensational free kick, and then it's just a lobbed ball that the defence doesn't react to. They just stand still, every single one of them in that box for that last moment, and that was the difference. And it seems strange to say that probably Europe's best ever comeback was middling, in all honesty.
Yeah.
I don't tend to disagree with that assessment of Barcelona's performances. But keeping with the hosts, Adam, was diving an issue, or as Marco Verratti said, was this result not down to the officials? Should Barcelona have even had a chance?
I think that's very magnanimous of Verratti to say that, but I think if that penalty for Suarez's penalty doesn't get given immediately after Neymar's free kick, they don't win the game. Or they don't win the tie. Sorry, obviously they're going to win the game, but they don't win the tie. And I think it was a very much referee affected the result. Obviously, Neymar's free kick is absolutely brilliant, and you're thinking at 4-1. Okay, there's a very vague hope with what injury time they might get added on, and they need 2. It's possible, but to get that penalty immediately, which in no way is a penalty for me at all, to get it immediately and then have 5 minutes of injury time, which I'm still not sure where they got 5 minutes from, to be honest. I don't know where they got 3 minutes from in the first half. That was mental as well. I didn't understand that in the slightest. So I think without that penalty, that ball runs out of play, then PSG have a chance to calm it down a little bit, and perhaps they waste a couple more minutes, and it doesn't happen. So I think that is one example of it being referee affected. It was definitely partially to blame, definitely not wholly to blame, but it's sort of a snowball thing. But it's definitely something you can point to. And in fair enough, as I know, it's very difficult to say, that it's sort of a bit silly to blame the referees and say, but it definitely was partially to blame. I felt like there was a PSG had a massive penalty shot in the first half for me, where Mascherano sides in and the ball hits his arm, and I thought those kind of penalties get given all the time, and it almost felt like the referee said, no, it's too early to end this game. If by PSG score, it was. And I felt there were a couple of decisions that felt very, very sort of unfortunate for PSG's point of view. So it's very magnanimous of variety to say that, but I think in reality it has to go down as partially down to the refereeing decisions.
Certainly a lot of contributing factors here. Nathan, what about the future? Unai Emery has had a chance to put a mark on this team. He seemed to have done so throughout January and February, but he seems to have failed at the biggest stage. Does he go now? Does he go at the end of the season? Does he get another chance next season?
No. I've got a piece coming out tomorrow about Emery's future, and it's gone, in all honesty. I can't see him recovering from this. Nasser Al-Khelaifi's also laid his own bed in this, that he sacked Laurent Blanc for instantly less. I mean, Blanc, yes, made mistakes against Manchester City, but he reached the quarterfinals and won every cup. Emery's already gone out of the round of 16. He can win every cup, and he's still done worse than Laurent Blanc did last season. That's unacceptable for what they're aiming for in the end. And if he keeps him, then what was the point in sacking Laurent Blanc, really? Because you could have kept him for another year. Yes, it was a bad decision against Man City, but you can learn from those mistakes when you've done so much for a club. I mean, he ran away with the league last season. There was no question that they were going to win Ligue 1 from about 5 weeks in. With 10 games to go, I can't say that Paris Saint-Germain will win the league. And after this, I'm not so sure that they'll keep contending. I mean, there's a massive game in a couple of weeks as well in the Coupe de France final now. If they lose to Monaco, I think he goes straight after that game. They might give him a couple more weeks, but if they lose that, he's lost a domestic trophy. He's lost the Champions League at an earlier stage. I think it's, for me, past the point of no return from what I see on paper. Whether I agree with it or not, no, but I didn't agree with Blanc sacking in the first place. But he's failed on a number of fronts. He's failed to adapt the team, to put his mark on the team, really, because he wanted that 4-2-3-1. That didn't work. They went back to the 4-3-3. That he's still not really laid a marker on the fact of taking Thiago Silva out of the team permanently or taking out his favourites too often. He's still bowing to that pressure. And this team is stagnating, in all honesty. He went from hero to zero very quickly, in the fact that he went to hero within a one-game performance against Barcelona that completely was against everything that told us from the rest of the season. And he then has gone back to zero by having the humiliating defeat that is probably more encapsulating of what their current season has been. So, yeah, he's gone.
All right, Adam, does he get a little bit of credit for the improvement that he had overseen in the last couple of months, or is this result just too much?
It's a very difficult one to judge. I do agree, at least to some extent, with what Nathan is saying. And I honestly thought that he'd been sacked almost after the game last night. I was looking on Twitter, and there's sort of rumours that he might have been, and it honestly wouldn't have surprised me if he had. But I think it's very easy to say that after this result, that the 4-0 in the first leg doesn't matter. And I think that's partially true. It kind of does overwrite it, especially in emotional terms. It does for PSG, and I feel like the players that played last night will probably carry this around, much like the Brazil players did when they lost 7-1 to Germany in the World Cup. Not as bad, but it's not far off for the rest of their careers. So there is that to some extent. But I feel like that 4-0 win still has some sort of impact, because that's something that Laurent Blanc never did. All right, they've lost 6-1 last night. They were terrible. It was a terrible performance. They completely crumbled like an England batting collapse. It was like that. But that Laurent Blanc never got a result like that in Champions League, and never even, it's barely a result, is it? But then he never got a performance over 90 minutes like that in the Champions League, or even really came close to it in a big game. So there was definitely some progression. I was beginning to feel like PSG looked like a side that could challenge on the European stage, looked like they were streetwise enough to compete with the bigger teams. And that improvement was definitely, at least in that game, was a step up from what Laurent Blanc had ever offered in the knockout rounds, at least. So he does have that to defend him, if you like. Last night was obviously this has a lot to the opposite, but I still think that may count for something. So I can see where Nathan's coming, that it's barely overall it's not really an improvement on Blanc at all, but I feel like there's the building blocks there, perhaps, like maybe just he might get another season and see how they go in Europe next year, and maybe he deserves that given the improvement that they show, and they haven't looked like the imperious PSG we know, and able to let's not forget that this was overall it was still 6-5 in aggregate. They mixed it in the first leg. They were very, very good. Rabiot looked fantastic. They played really well in that game and deserved to win that game 4-0 as well. So there's a caveat to what Nathan's saying. I'm not saying that this definitely means that Emery gets another year or gets anything else or even lasts to the Lorient game at the weekend. But there is something to take from it. It's small, but there is some very tiny positives from that first leg still. Obviously, last night is just blows it out of the water, but there is still something to take, I think, for from at least from Emery's point of view. I don't know whether the hierarchy of the club or the fans will feel like that, or in French football in general. But there is something there.
I do appreciate where you're coming from there, Adam. And I would have to agree that there are positive signs. Emery had built this up, working these young players. I think there's something to be said for Jonathan Ikone, who's on loan at Montpellier as well. He looks like he could become a useful squad player next year. I mean, I know he's been injured since making his loan move, but he had looked impressive in flashes before making that move. There's a lot of something to be said for Emery's ability to develop that squad. I think Mounier, being given the chance, I know he was poor on the evening last night, but being the chance to go ahead of Aurier, I think was another thing that shouldn't be undersold here, given the reputations of the two players prior to the season. I don't think people had really heard of Thomas Meunier before the Euros, if they're being honest with themselves, unless they're diehard Belgian football fans. So, yeah, he had made moves forward, and I think that, if he's willing to understand, how his personnel choices have affected this team and continue to develop on the good things he's shown, particularly in the last 2 months, I think there may be just the slightest bit of hope for him. But I know that we've seen, as Nick rightly mentioned, other managers being dismissed for less. It just doesn't look good for Emery's future. So, Nathan, coming to you, replacements. We've seen Arsene Wenger been mentioned, Diego Simeone been mentioned, Manuel Pellegrini's in China. He's got quite a bit of European experience. Ronald Koeman, if he doesn't get the Barcelona job, could be another one as well, someone with extensive European experience. Who looks like the best suited match? And if it's another name as well, feel free to throw that out there.
It's a tough one, isn't it? I think they may be hanging on hope for someone like Arsene Wenger. I don't think that's a bad choice. Maybe a fresh start for him and a manager with great experience, great pedigree, great strides with young players as well. Maybe that's a right move for them in the sense of he's a big name manager that might be out there. I think Simeone will be a fantastic one, but I don't see him leaving Atletico Madrid just yet. And if he does, I think he goes to Italy yet. I think he's got that as his next sort of destination on his map, unless a really big job comes up in England. Pellegrini is a decent shout. I think I thought he was maybe a little bit ousted from Man City unceremoniously for doing a decent job, although obviously they got a pretty good manager to replace him. And in all honesty, for Ronald Koeman, I think it's too early, these rumours, for everyone really, for Koeman. I don't think I've seen enough from him at this Everton stage where they have got better, but I don't think he's quite got that pedigree. But you're right in the sense of replacements is the big issue, because who do you bring in to replace Emery, who is of the right standard? At this moment in time, it's tough to tell, but you try and think of the managers around Europe or ones that might be available. It's tough. It really is. It's a really attractive job to someone who does want it and does feel like they can take that next step, maybe if they're a middle tier manager or upper middle tier. I say someone like Thomas Tuchel or something like that. Maybe might be an interesting one to add into the fire if they could get him. But yeah, it's a bit. That's why I think they'll probably give him to the end of the season yet, Emery. But there's the options out there. It is a bit of a tough one in recent times. Really, I don't think there's anyone out there that really stands out as someone other than maybe Simeone, as someone who would definitely be a really good pickup.
It's a bit harsh on Koeman, no? After a 15-year career, multiple titles at Ajax. Anyway, your point is certainly well taken. I don't think that even given the experience he's had with the likes of Benfica and Ajax, PSG is as much as Ajax have been a good team in the past, I think that their ambitions are certainly a different stratosphere than where Cohen's performed. Just to conclude this discussion, I know we've hammered poor PSG. Adam, finally for you, the players. Who needs to stay? Who needs to be given an expanded role? Silva signed that contract extension back in December. That's maybe perhaps looking like a bit of an albatross. Blaise Matuidi had looked to move on in the summer. He did stay. Who should move on, and what about additions? I know this is going to sound controversial coming from a Lyon fan, but for me, Alexander Lacazette looks like the ideal addition to PSG's squad right now.
It's an interesting one. Yeah, I think perhaps Lacazette would be a very, very worthwhile signing, obviously. But I think, is he really an upgrade on Cavani at the moment? It would have to be if Cavani left. If Cavani left, yes, Lacazette would be a great replacement for PSG in that central striker role. But looking at the rest of the squad, I think it's not necessarily in terms of personnel. You have to think that it's quite obvious from the squad about how much money they spent, how much quality they have in every position. The only major one, the only decision for me in terms of current personnel they have to make whether to leave is Thiago Silva and Blaise Matuidi. For me, Matuidi's been poor for 18 months, if not more. And last night he went kind of under the radar with the rest of the team playing so badly, but he was pretty terrible last night and has not impressed me for a long, long time. So maybe it's time for him to move on. Thiago Silva, he's 32 now. He's also not been particularly impressive for a long, long time. We saw in the first leg that Kimpembe and Marquinhos could hold the fort pretty well without him. So maybe it's time for him to be moved along. Perhaps they might get a decent fee. You might go to somewhere like a team that will buy big players for seemingly no reason, like Manchester United. Maybe somewhere like that he might move along to. Maybe he suits Mourinho's style. So perhaps those who need to go. And in terms of additions, it's very difficult to say that there's anybody really out there who would be affordable and well, they've obviously got a lot of resources, but would be acquirable, if you like, that would want to move to PSG and would be in a position to make the sort of step up to PSG rather than it being a lateral or downward move. Perhaps Alexis Sanchez might be a good shout if he can be, if he's unhappy as he looks at Arsenal at the moment. Perhaps he would be a good call, but. He's probably an upgrade on Di Maria and Draxler probably quite comfortably. So that's one area. But I'm not saying saying that feels like me saying they're weak in those areas, and they're not weak. It feels like the issue is not necessarily personnel based; it's mental, and they should take your advice, Eric, I think, and bring through those younger players and really get that core of French, and well, not to say French, but players that have come through the academy, players that hold PSG close to themselves and really feel like they want to win for this club, and that Paris is really rooted that is ingrained in their careers and in their psyche. I think that's more important than going and spending 30 million on a couple of other players to replace someone's for a slight upgrade on something, which is what they've done so many times already, and it hasn't really worked. So I think it's philosophy that needs to change rather than personnel.
No, I can't say I disagree with that. I mean, I know Guedes has been a younger player that's been brought in, but he's looked really off the boil. I know that
he has.
We had
the thing with Guedes though is that he's come from Portugal, and he although he's younger and he's a prospect and he could develop. I don't know that he's someone that is. Is PSG something that really matters to him? I don't know. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but it's difficult to say.
I mean, certainly the wage packet he's on, I'm sure will be an improvement from what he'd been receiving at Benfica.
Yeah.
So I think unless there's another burning point that either of you have on this match, that should conclude our discussion after an enjoyable half an hour. To move on to Lyon and their enthralling game from earlier this evening. It's good to see the team play with a good attacking intent, but once again, defensive errors, particularly Mouchard Diakabi, have left the tie in the balance. So, Nathan, coming to you, were Lyon lucky? Was this a fair result? Their second half performance justify the final margin?
Yeah, I think that their second half definitely justified it. I thought they were really, really excellent in the second half. In fact, they played with a verve. They played with a bit more confidence. I think in that first half, they were maybe a little bit reluctant to play against Roma, who can be so good on the counter and have really good players in those midfield areas and attacking areas. But they really took the game to him in the second half. I thought Lacazette was very good in his movement, and he scored an excellent fourth, which I think could be a really, really important goal. That last goal. To go 4-2 back to Roma is really, really important. I thought Tolisso was very good. I thought Ghazal, especially, well, in the first half, I thought he was a bit middling, but in the second half, he certainly was much better. Fekir came on and performed admirably. Valbuena was good. So yeah, it was a really positive performance from Lyon, and one, especially from what I've seen in the last few weeks. I know I've not seen them live recently, but it's the first time in a while. But they certainly looked a little bit more intentive. There was still a couple of lapses in concentration at the back, but they looked a little bit better with Jallet back on, and they settled with less pressure on them, at least in the second half. But yeah, I think it was a really justified performance with that. Like I say, the second period in mind, they really deserve to go with a 4-2 victory, and they can go with a lot of hope to the Stadio Olimpico that, you know, Roma will need at least 2 goals to start with, and a goal on Lyon's end makes it 5-2, and 3 goals for Roma might be a little bit of an uphill challenge. So yeah, real positive result. The only disappointment, like I say, is that the 2 away goals might come back to bite them, but they'll take what they got out. Well, against probably, other than Manchester United, the other best team left in this tournament, they'll absolutely take that.
They would have to agree. Adam, let's talk a little bit more about Alexander Lacazette. We had some of our favorite correspondents on Twitter, Lana DeWood and Eric Hellberg, mentioning his link-up play, 100% passing completion rate. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen that from an attacking player. 37 passes attempted, 37 passes completed. How important was he, and how does this put him in standing for the national team, which will be decided on next Thursday, by the way?
It's a very very interesting question. First of all, he's kind of quietly gone about his business this season. It feels like perhaps this season there's been something slightly different in the way he's performed. Perhaps in previous seasons he's been a little bit more sort of, for want of a better word, flashy. He's made headlines perhaps, and he's put in actually landmark performances, and he's scored hat tricks there, and he's been it's sort of been a little bit up and down. But this season, I think he's, for the first time in quite a while, he's been much more consistent. And obviously today it showed that really showed through, I should say, sorry, not just in his goal scoring. Obviously he scored that very important goal you mentioned at the end, but his all-round play has really developed, and he's showing that consistency, that he can consistently play at a high level, which I think for him is really important. Because for me, even though he had that brilliant season where they challenged for the league title, and he was good last year in spells as well, that consistency has been something that he's lacked in his game. Whereas this season, he's not been the player that everyone's talking about, perhaps like Cavani. He's not necessarily been the transfer rumors haven't been flying around all over the place that they have before, perhaps a little bit helped by Orlas. But he's sort of quietly gone about his business. He's quietly scored quite a few goals, and his link-up play and his all-round development has really, really jumped on. And I think not just tonight, but especially in the since Christmas and much before as well, he's looked like the complete forward. And I don't know if he's looked like the complete forward consistently enough in previous years. So I think it's a very interesting situation for Lyon going forward. Does he leave in the summer? I think quite possibly. And where do they go without him? Perhaps Depay moves into the middle. Perhaps they've got other tricks up their sleeve. They've got the money from that signing to move on in other directions. But for Lacazette, I feel like his career is about to take the next step, and he's proven that he's ready to take that step. And perhaps winning Europa League this year with Lyon, which looks more possible now after this brilliant win, and going back to the Stadio Olimpico with that 2-goal lead. They're definitely favourites for this game, and perhaps apart from Man United, they're the next best team in this competition. So it could be that's quietly a breakthrough season for Lacazette. Although he's a brilliant talent, he's perhaps showing that he is capable of playing on the high stage to a consistent level and for a whole season, and will still score goals on a consistent basis. So I think he looks brilliant, and he looks like the best Lacazette that we've had for quite some time. So I'm really impressed, and hopefully he can be that French striker that perhaps will replace Benzema when Benzema moves along. He's obviously not anywhere near the France squad at the moment, given the situation there, and obviously that may change in the future. Perhaps maybe when they get a new manager in. But for now, I'd like to see him being given a chance in that French team, and perhaps given a run in that central striker role, because I think there's a space there that someone can really make their own. I don't I seem to talk about Drew people with Football Road quite a lot about whether he's good enough, and it's a common discussion. But for France, I feel like either Kevin Gamero or Alexandre Lacazette in this form this season are a better option, and it would be great to see Lacazette given that chance. I think he deserves it, and I think he's the type of player that could be France's central striker for many years to come. So I'd really like to see him given the chance as soon as possible.
A final question on European play then. Maxime Gonalon had been struggling for form in the past month or so, really. Bruno Genesio was forced to assure that his captain would get the start to the media. Was this a bit of redemption for the Lyon captain, Nathan?
Yes, a little bit. I thought he played pretty well in this game, especially against someone as good at the moment as Nainggolan, who has been excellent for Roma in the last couple of weeks. And he's really the one who pulls the strings for them, especially going forward. So, yeah, it was really good to see him play. It's always strange with Gonalon because he never seems to quite do loads, but he always seems to be in the right place at the right time, even though in the last couple of weeks it's been a little bit difficult, and in the last month or so he's not quite found the form. So, yeah, I'm pleased that he's getting back to with around, especially with like Toussaint around him. And I know you did a fantastic piece on him the other week, Eric, that he's really growing into that role alongside him, and he's adding that balance to the team. I think it's allowing Gonalon to slowly but surely find his more specific role in that midfield. Instead of cleaning up everyone's mess, he's got someone next to him that's helping him there, and I think that's really assisting him on reaching that next level again, which we know he can be. And it's great to see, in all honesty, because he is a really good player that on his day Lyon really, really need if they want to push on in the Europa League.
Yeah, I know we'd mentioned it a few times about the threat of Rajiv Nainggolan. I think he was pretty anonymous on the night, and a lot of that was down to the play of Gonalon for me. So well done to Lyon, giving France a shred of hope and not having the coefficient dashed. I know Monaco are still to play City next week, but it's good to see a French side not only take this competition seriously, but do well in it. Lyon have made the quarterfinals, I believe, in 2013-14. They look like they've got an excellent shot to meet or exceed that performance, of course, depending on not only the reverse fixture, but who they get in the draw. So let's turn our attention now briefly to fly through the league. We did not do very well last week with our predictions. I had no correct results. Adam had no correct results. Nathan got one correct result, draw between Bordeaux and Lyon, but he picked a 3-3 draw. And there were certainly enough chances to have
it was close,
seen that come off, but it was 1-1. That does leave us Adam on 51, Nathan on 52, myself on 64. But there are 5 matches we're going to fly through this week. Let's start with a match from tomorrow. Adam, coming to you. That's Marseille hosting Angers. Marseille are in good form, but so are Angers, having won, I believe, 5 straight in all competitions. There's huge pressure here with Lyon potentially distracted given their result tonight, and Bordeaux also facing Monaco, not likely to pick up points. They could make a real statement of intent towards making themselves a Europa League contender once again. Bafétimbi Gomis has been back in training. Is this a match to risk him, or does Rudy Garcia stick with the 4-2-3-1 that had done so well against Lorient last weekend?
It's something that he's going to have to seriously consider between in making his team selection for this game. I really feel that Gomis is a very important player for them, given he's the only type of player, or the only player of that type, in the squad. So I'd be careful with him coming into this game, given that Angers are a very physical side, and risking him in that sort of environment maybe not worth it, given how well they played last week at Lorient. Obviously, Lorient are a poor side, and I feel like they're edging towards that sort of trapdoor marked League 2, but. So it may be a bit of a sort of a false result, that 4-1 win, but they were very good in that game, and Cabella played well in the central sort of false 9 kind of role. So if they can carry that momentum into this game, perhaps it is a game where they can avoid using Gomis, give him another week, make sure he's fully fit, and make sure they can get him back into the team. Garcia said something sort of odd in the press conference today. He kind of said we can be strong. We obviously, well, he kind of said we are stronger with Gomez, but we've proven that we can also be stronger without him, which is an odd way to phrase it, but it kind of makes sense. They have proven that they can play and play well without Bartolomé Gomez in the side. Having said that, he's still a very, very important player, and I think if they can carry the momentum from last week, as I said, keep Cabello in the team, give Gomez that extra bit of rest, get him back fighting for the rest of the season, and they can use this as a plan B. But if it's a plan B that can work tomorrow, why not? Maybe he can make an appearance off the bench if they need him. But for me, I'd because he's so important and so unusual in terms of their squad, it might be worth being a bit more pragmatic here and saying let's go Cabello or Ng up front, because those two are both very good players too, and it could easily be a turning point for them if they in a negative sense, if they go and lose this game. Perhaps Armchair have designs on Europe themselves, so it's a difficult decision, but I personally like to see him keeping the team that played last week, and we'll keep Gomez for next week, and they can really push on for the top 5.
All right, your score prediction then, Adam?
War. It was a close game last season. I seem to remember Angers actually winning it, perhaps, but 2-1 Marseille.
All right, Nathan?
1-1. All
right, I'll go with the 2-0 home victory for Marseille. Nathan, coming on to you, got another perhaps match that's flying under the radar, given all the European hoopla that we've seen in the past few days. But I think this is a really tasty match. Monaco hosting an in-form Bordeaux. Monaco are certain to rotate players ahead of the match with Manchester City at the weekend, or next midweek. But Bordeaux have no need to. Their next non-Liga match is the Coupe de France in a month's time. Is this a potential pitfall for the leaders, especially with Nice likely to be level on points, having been set to face Caen tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. And with PSG playing Lorient on Sunday as well, it really does put a little bit of pressure on Monaco to get a result here, because it should Nice win and be level on points, and you can practically expect Paris Saint-Germain to probably get the 3 points in Brittany, then it's really imperative for Jardim to keep that pressure up on both of them by beating Bordeaux, which is no mean feat at the moment. I mean, only Paris Saint-Germain have managed to beat them so far in 2017, and they've been really excellent. I thought they were pretty good against Lyon, although they were pretty lucky on occasions. I mean, they probably should have had a penalty, which might have been a better result, but at the same time, Varda's opener is offside, so you take one, you take the other. But they're really positive at the moment with some really interesting young players, like we've mentioned a number of times this week. So what do Monaco do? I mean, they probably will rest a few players, but Glick will definitely start, because obviously he won't make the Manchester City game through suspension. What they decide to do midfield will be interesting, given that they'll probably want to play Fabinho and Bakayoko in that game. Same with up front. It'll be interesting to see which combination they decide to go for. It'll probably give a clue to what they decide to do in midweek. So yeah, it's a real balancing act for Jardim, because this is a tough game, and he'll know it, because Bordeaux will let them know if they don't already quickly. So the hope for them is that they can get it over and done with very quickly. But at the moment, this Bordeaux team is not likely for that. And what changes he decides to make are really important. Whether he maybe gives his players his full team out maybe for 60 minutes and hope that he can pull maybe 2 or 3, well, hopefully get a result in that first hour and pull a couple of them off and take the points. Maybe that's his best bet in this one, in all honesty, because I don't know if Monaco are quite deep enough to make 4 or 5 changes in this one and really still have that fitness and maintain it for midweek. So yeah, this could be a really tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, we had seen them make rotations and still get good results against Lille earlier in the season, but that's without Boschilia. Guido Corrillo is another one who's unavailable. So it's a slightly shallower squad. Domaterio has gone alone as well. So your prediction then, Nathan?
I'm still going for a Monaco win. I think it'll be 2-1.
All right. That's words out of my mouth. I'll go with 3-1. Adam?
3-0 Monaco for me.
Okay. Now, Adam, sticking with you, we've also got a pretty intriguing match in Brittany. It's Bastia traveling to Guingamp. Guingamp have been Ligue 1's worst team in 2017, 5 points from 9 matches. And a win here would take Bastia out of the relegation zone, believe it or not. Is this the Corsicans' best chance to get some space? And are they really as doomed as some would have had? I know we talked on Monday during the regular show about relegation. Is this a chance for Bastia to pull clear, and can they survive?
I think it is. I think it is a chance to book it. Gangon have been, although I remember on the sort of the halfway point show, we talked about our sort of surprises and our awards for the season and sort of manager so far, and Anton Kambaya was very much up there. Since that point, it's obviously it's very very sort of facetious to say, but his kind of stock in terms of this season at least has dropped a little bit. Gangon haven't been anywhere near as impressive as they were in the first half of the season, which is a little bit disappointing. Down in 11th, when we talked about on that show, perhaps it was around that time where you may have even asked me the question whether it was likely Angers would step, and they're now above Gangon. So it kind of shows sort of conflicting fortunes of both those two sides. So given Gangon's form, I feel like, and Bastia's sort of new manager bounce, they've been very good in the last couple of games. At least that fight and that sort of sense of organisation has returned to the Bastia team. So I think this is a really good opportunity for them to get 3 points. Even if they were to win this game, they'd only be up to sort of level on points with Nancy. So it's unlikely they're gonna pull too far away from the position they're in at the moment. But whether I think they can stay up, yeah, I think absolutely they do. I think that, like I said, that the new manager has really had a very noticeable effect. The Ciccolini's reign was a bit limp, perhaps, in by Bastia's terms, and they sort of got a little bit sort of rough around the edges, and it kind of all fell apart. But I know, speaking to Andres about the chap that's come in, he's very impressed with the way he's gone about managing the squad, and his record looks impressive. So I think it might be the classic new manager bounce around this time of the season would be enough to keep Bastia in the league. I'd honestly back them too. I think, especially with the relegation playoff, I don't see them finishing in the bottom two. So at the worst for them, I think 18th, and they might sort of scrape through a relegation playoff. So I would back them to stay up, and I'd back them to get a result of some description here. They're traditionally a very poor team away from home. But this season, that's not necessarily been the case. Their away form has been, not by no means good, but it's incomparable to their home form. So I think that's up, and I think this is a good opportunity for them to continue that positive bounce under the new manager, and hopefully not get anybody sent off this week, and maybe nick a point at least. So I think they'll be fine this season.
Nicolas Saint-Roof has been suspended for 4 matches at High Budan.
I think that's harsh. It felt like he didn't really. It was almost unfortunate, that incident. It was obviously very very distressing. Padre was seriously hurt, but it felt like it was an unfortunate incident rather than any malice behind it.
Yeah, well, but still, nevertheless, player safety must be considered. I'll go with
the
1-1 draw here. Adam, yourself?
I'll go 0-0.
All right, Nathan?
2-0 Gangon. Bastia play to be sent off. Is that an extra point?
All right, Nathan for the combination there. We've got another match between a Breton team that's been in poor form this year and a relegation candidate. Nathan, that's Rennes hosting Dijon. And Dijon are facing a team that have won just once this calendar year in the league, and they've drifted from a run at Europe, 4th place at one point. And injuries have certainly played their part here, but can Rennes kiss Europe goodbye without a result here?
Absolutely. I personally think that they might be a little bit too far off already. I mean, they would need results to start going their way. And yes, Saint-Étienne are probably slipping slowly towards them. But with Toulouse being a little bit better, Angers playing better at the moment, Marseille, Bordeaux and Lyon still above them in those places as well, I don't think they've got enough. And we mentioned this when the winter window ended as well, that losing Paul José and Tep and losing Grosicki, they let Pedro Enrique leave as well, although he was significantly less important. But they had such a depth in the wings, and now they seem to have no one at all. I mean, they don't seem to start Diakabe, which is what we all called for as well, and that's not happened. Giovanni Sio is a middling player at best, in the fact that he sometimes scores goals, but the majority of the time he doesn't score goals. Wesley Said has done a little bit better in recent weeks at least, but they just don't have enough going forward. They're just an uninteresting attacking team anymore. They don't really play with any verve. It looks like a rebuild job for me in the summer, that they look to their academy that's brought so many great players. Like Nyagnon looks very, very good. And obviously it's brought Dembele in the past. Maybe they look there. Maybe they look for a couple of bargains as well to fill this team out, because there's just... it just seems like a husk of what it could have been, especially from the start of the season and from the end of last season as well. So it's a real disappointment for them. And this, in my opinion, is a real chance for Dijon, who are a much more attacking team. And if they can get a goal or a couple of goals, I don't think Rennes will be the kind of team to come back for them. So with the style that Dijon play with Diony and Tavares, they might have a real chance in this one, I think.
All right. And Adam, what would be your prediction for this?
I'm going to go 0-0.
All right. Nathan?
I'm going to go 2-0 Dijon.
On the road win. And then I'll go with a 1-1 draw. Seems to be the vogue result for Rennes of late. Finally, Adam, coming to you, we have what may be, by some measures, the biggest match of the weekend, at least with its implications towards relegation. That's Nancy hosting Lille. Both of these teams really could use 3 points. Who's more likely to come out of their shell in this encounter?
Well, I think it's time for Lille to really show that those attacking players they signed in the summer, in the winter window. It's really time for them to start hitting the ground and hitting the ground running and having that effect that we wanted them to have in the first few games. Obviously, Zeka and El Ghazi have been okay, but they've made so many signings and a lot of them haven't really come off so far. So you would hope that if anyone's going to sort of come out of their shell a little bit, it would be Lille. But compared to Nancy as well, it feels like there's not much of an option there because Nancy are very much struggling to score goals. It feels like they're sort of devoid of a central striker. I mean, Correa, the Tinkerman of Ligue 1 this season, has tried a number of players in that central striker role, and none of them have really been given too much of a chance. Cora played there last week. The Mandans played there on and off, and Hadji's been started the season okay and has petered out. They don't have a viable option in this league to score even 5-6 goals from that position. They're sort of relying on Issa Dia, and Benassa's got a couple as well. They really are struggling to score goals. The fact they've got less than Nantes is quite something. So you would hope that it would be Lille that would take this game by the scruff of the neck, and some of those attacking players would perhaps get more of a chance against Nancy, who after a very good mid-season seem to be that kind of peak, that zenith of their performances this season, when Correa really adapted to the league and they sort of will performances and results from his team. Sorry, that Lille will be the ones to take this game by the scruff of the neck against honestly, to be harsh, perhaps a little bit, but a weaker opposition, arguably apart from Lorraine, the weakest team in the division. So it might not be a game of too many goals, but I think this will be one that if Lille don't win, then they'll be looking over their shoulders a little bit more at that bottom 4 or 5 behind them. So you would hope that this is the time they get that win. It was a good win at Caen as well. Unfortunately against Bordeaux, kind of lost it a bit. But yeah, for me, this one has to be a Lille win, and it really has to be a game they have to really target to get those 3 points, because I don't see Bielsa managing in Ligue 2. So for me, Lille really need to target this game and go for those 3 points.
Nathan?
I think I'll pick on. I was going to say I'll piggyback off Adam's point that this game will probably literally have no goals, so a goalless draw.
All right. I myself will go with a 1-0 Lille win. And Adam?
Oh, it's a difficult one. 2-0 Lille.
2 goals for Lille. All right. A rarity these days.
Miracles do happen.
Well, thank you very much, gents. Certainly a lot to talk about in French football this week. I think PSG has become a de rigueur story for all of European football, and we could have easily had a show twice this length talking about PSG and their pitfalls, their future, and all that. But that is all for this week. Please do follow us on Twitter at GFFN and visit our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com. Nathan will, of course, be back on Monday from 8 o'clock UK with the main show. We will also be back next week on Thursday to recap the international call-ups as well as the European action next week. That is all for now. For Nathan Staples and Adam White, I've been Eric Devin. Thank you very much and have a pleasant weekend.